She cheated on me with my best friend's wife, then stole my $250, $0 inheritance and filed false legal claims to take my house. And now they're all turning against each other, leaving me devastated and broke. I never thought I'd be the guy whose wife cheated on him with his best friend's wife, stole his inheritance, and then tried to drag him through legal hell, all while pretending everything was perfectly fine. It all started with little signs that I brushed off at first. Emily, my wife, had been acting distant for a few months, rarely smiling, avoiding eye contact, and suddenly being overly defensive about her phone. She'd claim she was just stressed from work, that she was tired, that I was imagining things. But I knew better. Women don't just change overnight without a reason. Then I noticed her spending more time away from home. She'd say she was working late, but her stories didn't add up. She'd leave her phone unlocked on the nightstand, which I usually wouldn't bother to check, but one night I was bored and glanced at her messages. That's when I saw it. A string of texts from someone named Alex, and they were just friendly. They were intimate, flirtatious, full of suggestive comments and plans to meet up. My stomach dropped. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger. I knew Alex, he was my best friend Jake for years. How could Emily do this to me, to all of us? I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started digging. I installed a hidden app on her phone, checked her social media, and followed her when she said she was going out with friends. That's when I saw her meet up with Alex multiple times. It wasn't just a one-time thing. They'd meet at her apartment, sometimes late at night, and from what I could gather, they'd have sex. I found receipts for hotel stays she booked under a fake name. My mind was racing. How could she lie so effortlessly? How could she betray me, our marriage, and my best friend all at once? The worst part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the lies. Emily kept insisting she loved me, that I was overreacting, that I was paranoid. She'd say, "You're imagining things," or "You're just jealous because I work hard and deserve some fun." She'd cry, act hurt, and then turn around and do it again. I felt like I was losing my mind. She was so good at lying, it almost seemed like she believed her own stories. I saw her with Alex that night, kissing him in her driveway, and I realized I'd been blind. She'd been cheating on me for months, maybe longer, right under my nose. One day I came home early from work. I wanted to surprise her, maybe catch her in the act. Instead, I found her packing a bag. She told me she was going to stay with her sister for a few days because she was overwhelmed. I wasn't stupid. I knew she was running from something, and I decided to follow her. That's when I saw her get into Alex's car. They drove off together, and I followed at a safe distance. She was at his place for hours. I felt sick. All the trust I'd built over the years was crumbling. I confronted her that night. When she got home, I was waiting in the living room, my heart pounding. I showed her the receipts, the messages, everything I'd uncovered. Her face turned pale. She tried to deny it, of course. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "It's just sex, that's all. It doesn't mean anything." I was furious. How could she lie so blatantly? I told her I knew about her affair with Alex, and I demanded she tell the truth. She broke down crying, saying she was stressed, that I was never there for her, that she needed excitement. She spun this web of lies, trying to make me feel guilty for catching her. That night, I felt like my world was falling apart. I loved Emily, or at least I thought I did. But now I saw her for what she was, a liar and a cheat. I couldn't believe she'd do this to me, to our life together, and to Jake, who I thought was my best friend. I was angry, hurt, and utterly betrayed. But what pushed me over the edge was realizing that she had been hiding so much more. I found out she was already planning to take my inheritance, which I hadn't even told her about. That's when I knew this wasn't just about an affair. It was about her greed, her manipulation, and her complete disregard for me. She had stolen $250, $0 of my inheritance, money I'd saved for years, intended to secure my future, and she gambled it away or planned to use it for her new life with Alex. She even filed false legal claims to try to take my house, claiming I was unfit to own it. I felt like I was in some twisted nightmare. How could someone you loved turn into someone so cold? How could she betray me, steal from me, and then lie her way out of it? I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I had to fight back. I couldn't just let her get away with it all. That's when I started planning my revenge. But I'll tell you about that in the next part. After I confronted Emily that night, everything felt like it was shattering into pieces. She broke down crying, trying to spin her lies, but I wasn't buying it. I sat there staring at her, feeling this mix of rage and heartbreak. I knew the game was over. She'd been cheating, stealing, lying. Everything I thought was real about our life was a lie. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't even process it at first. I kept thinking about the years we spent together, the plans we made, the trust I had blindly given her. All of that was gone now, replaced by this sick realization that she'd been planning her escape, using me, and taking everything I'd worked for. I started digging into her financials the very next morning. I knew she'd hidden something. She always was good at hiding her tracks. Turns out she had been funneling money into secret accounts, and I found evidence of her transferring chunks of my inheritance, $250, into accounts she didn't tell me about. She'd been planning to run away with Alex, using my money as her ticket out. That was the moment I realized I had to act fast. I contacted a lawyer, but I also knew I couldn't just let her walk away with everything. I wanted to make sure she paid for what she'd done, not just emotionally but financially too. I started setting up a plan. I wanted to catch her in the act if she tried to take my house or claim more of my assets illegally. I hired a private investigator to follow her, which was a step I never thought I'd take, but I needed hard evidence. Turns out, Emily had already filed legal claims, trying to say I was mentally unfit to manage my own house, that she was the only one who could take care of it. I knew she was trying to manipulate the courts, just like she manipulated me. I also discovered she'd been talking to lawyers behind my back, trying to get legal custody of the house, and even trying to claim more of my inheritance through false documents. Meanwhile, I was dealing with a flood of emotions, anger, disappointment, and that gnawing feeling that I'd been so blind for so long. How could she do this? How could she lie, cheat, steal from me, and then turn around and act innocent? I felt betrayed by everyone I trusted. Not just Emily, but Jake too, my best friend. I never imagined he'd be part of this mess, but I learned he'd been complicit in helping Emily hide things, maybe even helping her plan her escape. That was a punch to the gut. I felt like I lost not only my wife but also my best friend. I started pushing back hard. I threatened to go to the authorities, to expose her for the theft and the fraud. I wanted her to face the consequences, not just for the affair but for stealing my inheritance and trying to take my home. I also began secretly recording her conversations, just in case she tried to lie her way out of it when she knew I was onto her. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply she'd planned all this. She had a whole web of lies ready to spin to save herself. One day she came home furious, accusing me of spying and invading her privacy. She called me paranoid, crazy, and said I was ruining everything. That's when I snapped. I told her I knew about her plans, her illegal claims, her transfer of money. I told her I had proof. Her face drained of color. She started pleading, claiming she loved me, that she only did it because she was stressed and felt trapped. She said she wanted a way out, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But I knew better. She had been lying to my face for months, maybe longer. Meanwhile, I was gathering more evidence. I had found a hidden safe in her closet, full of documents, receipts, and even fake IDs. She was ready to disappear with my money, her lover, and the house I'd worked so hard to build. I realized I had to act fast or she'd slip away entirely. I contacted the bank, the legal team, and the police. I was determined to put an end to her manipulations. I also reached out to Jake, telling him everything, confronting him about his involvement. Turns out, Jake had been aware of Emily's affair, and he'd helped her hide some of her financial moves. That was the final betrayal I couldn't accept. The next few days were a whirlwind. I filed for an emergency injunction to freeze her accounts, stop her from selling or transferring the house, and called in the authorities to investigate her claims. I also started preparing for a legal fight over the inheritance and the house, knowing she'd do everything to keep what she wanted. It was all so overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her get away with this, not after everything. It was a shock to realize how deep the deception went. I'd loved her, trusted her, and she'd been plotting her escape, using me as her pawn. The betrayal was so complete, I wondered how I could even look at her without feeling disgusted. But I also knew I had to keep my head clear. I had to fight for what was mine, for the truth, and for my future. I didn't know what the next step was yet, but I was determined to see this through, no matter how ugly it got. Do you want me to continue with the next part? The legal battle kicked off faster than I expected. Once I got the injunction in place to freeze her accounts and halt her attempts to transfer the house, Emily's attitude changed. She went from being defiant to frantic. She started throwing tantrums, claiming I was ruining her life, that I was paranoid and jealous, and that I was trying to keep her from being happy. Her words were dripping with venom, but I didn't care anymore. I had enough proof: texts, bank statements, receipts. I knew she'd been planning her escape for months, and now she was desperately trying to cover her tracks. Meanwhile, I had to deal with the emotional fallout. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I loved Emily, or at least I thought I did, and now I was discovering she'd been lying and cheating right under my nose. It was a punch to the gut every time I saw her face, knowing she'd betrayed me so completely. I was angry, yes, but mostly I felt betrayed, by her, by Jake, even by myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I kept replaying the moments we had, trying to understand where everything went wrong, but the truth was, she had been orchestrating her escape for a long time. The worst part was how she kept spinning her lies. She tell me she was innocent, that she loved me, that she was just stressed and needed a break. She'd cry, acting like the victim, trying to guilt-trip me into backing down. But I knew better. I had the evidence. I knew she'd been having sex with Alex, that she'd been secretly transferring money, and that she'd been planning to take everything from me. My house, my inheritance, my peace of mind. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long. One day I caught her in a huge lie. She told me she was meeting her sister, that she needed space to think. I followed her out of curiosity, and she went straight to Alex's apartment. They were there for hours, and I saw them leave together, holding hands. That was the moment I decided I had to take more drastic action. I hired a private investigator to gather even more evidence, especially about her plans to sell the house or claim my inheritance illegally. The pie confirmed what I already suspected. Emily was trying to manipulate the legal system, forging documents and trying to make it look like I was unfit to manage my own property. I also learned that she had been talking to lawyers behind my back. She hired her own legal team, trying to file false claims to get control of the house and my money. I found out she'd been submitting fake documents, claiming I was mentally unstable or that I'd signed things under duress. It was sickening to see how far she was willing to go. All I wanted was to protect what was mine and stop her from ruining my life further. In the midst of all this chaos, I started reaching out to the right authorities. I filed reports for theft, fraud, and attempted asset transfer. I wanted her to face the consequences. I also contacted the bank to put a hold on her accounts, preventing her from withdrawing or transferring any more money. I was determined to stop her from running away with my inheritance or selling the house. I knew she was planning her escape, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. At the same time, I was trying to keep my emotions in check. It was hard. I felt so betrayed, so humiliated. I trusted Emily with everything, my heart, my future, my money, and she'd used that trust to stab me in the back. Every time I saw her, I felt a surge of anger and sadness. How could someone you love do this? How could she lie so effortlessly? I kept asking myself these questions, trying to find some way to make sense of it all, but there was no sense. Only pain. I also started preparing for the worst. If she managed to get court orders to claim my house or inheritance, I had to be ready. I hired a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes and property disputes. We began drafting legal strategies to fight her claims, to prove her fraud, and to preserve my rights. It was a battle on many fronts, emotionally, financially, legally, and I knew it wouldn't be over anytime soon. Throughout all this, I kept thinking about Jake, my best friend. I'd always trusted him, but now I was questioning everything. It turned out he had been aware of Emily's affair for months and had helped her hide some of her plans. That realization hurt more than anything. How could my closest friend betray me like that? I confronted him, and he admitted he'd been trying to protect Emily, that he'd been caught in her web of lies. I told him I didn't want to see or hear from him again. The betrayal was too deep. In the end, I realized I couldn't control what Emily was doing, but I could control my response. I decided to fight for what was mine, to expose her lies, and to regain some sense of stability. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. I had to. Because if I didn't, she'd win, and I refused to let her destroy everything I'd built. I had learned a hard lesson. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. Want me to keep going? The legal proceedings dragged on for what felt like forever. Every day brought new surprises, new lies, and new manipulations from Emily. She was fighting hard, trying to convince the courts that I was unfit, that I was unstable, and that she deserved everything I had. Meanwhile, I had my lawyers digging through everything she'd filed: falsified documents, fake signatures, forged signatures, and the fake claims she'd made to seize my house and inheritance. It was a full-blown war of deception, and I had to stay alert every step of the way. One day, I got a call from my lawyer that Emily had filed a motion to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could take control of the house without contest. That was the last straw. I knew I had to fight even harder. I gathered all my medical records, my financial statements, and testimonies from people who knew me well. I wanted to prove I was sane, capable, and that Emily's accusations were nothing but malicious lies. It was humiliating to have to defend myself like that, but I had no choice. In the meantime, I kept collecting evidence. I found out Emily had been secretly meeting with a lawyer who specialized in divorce and asset disputes, trying to craft a strategy to get everything she wanted. I also discovered she'd been trying to sell off some of my assets, my stocks, my property, without my consent. Every new piece of evidence made it clearer how far she was willing to go to get her hands on my money and my house. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like I was fighting not just for my possessions, but for my reputation, my sanity, and my dignity. Every time I thought about her lying, cheating, and stealing from me, I'd get this sick feeling deep inside. I'd ask myself how I could have missed all the signs, how I trusted her for so many years. It was a crushing realization that I had been blind to the truth for so long. The person I loved and trusted the most was the one trying to destroy me from within. One particular day, I got some shocking news. Emily had actually hired her own private investigator, probably to keep tabs on me and maybe even to try to find ways to discredit me in court. I knew she was desperate, but this crossed a line. I hired my own pie to counter hers, and what I found was worse than I expected. Emily and Jake had been meeting secretly, planning how to cover her tracks, how to hide her assets, and how to manipulate the court system. I felt sick at the thought of my best friend helping her betray me. That betrayal stung more than anything else so far. I also learned she'd been trying to secretly transfer ownership of the house to her name. She'd forged signatures, lied to the lawyers, and did everything she could to make it look like she was the rightful owner. I had to act fast. I filed a temporary restraining order to prevent her from selling or transferring any property until the court could decide. I also subpoenaed her financial records, bank statements, and phone logs. I wanted everything on record, every lie, every betrayal. Throughout this chaos, I kept asking myself what I could do to put an end to this nightmare. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, but I also just wanted peace. I started reaching out to old friends, trying to rebuild my emotional strength. I realized I'd been so consumed by her betrayal that I'd neglected my own well-being. I started therapy, even if just to keep my head straight. I needed to process everything: the anger, the heartbreak, the sense of betrayal. The core of it all was this: I had to be prepared for whatever came next. Emily was relentless, manipulative, and cunning. She wasn't going to give up easily, but I was just as determined. I knew I had the truth on my side, and I had to keep fighting. I also knew I couldn't trust anyone blindly anymore, not even Jake. That realization hit hard. I had to rely on myself, on the evidence I'd collected, and on my own strength to see this through. Looking back now, I see how this whole ordeal has changed me. I used to believe in love, trust, and fairness. Now I see how fragile all that can be when greed, lies, and betrayal come into play. I learned that people can pretend to be your friends while secretly stabbing you in the back. And I learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty just to protect what's yours. I don't know how this will end, but I do know one thing. I refuse to be the victim anymore. I'm going to fight for my rights, my dignity, and my future, no matter what it takes. Want me to keep going? The courtroom battles were brutal. Every hearing felt like stepping into a war zone. Emily's team was relentless, throwing out false accusations, trying to paint me as unstable and unfit to manage my own affairs. She brought witnesses who claimed I was erratic, paranoid, and not in control of my emotions. I had my own witnesses, people who knew me well, who could testify that I was sane, rational, and competent. It was exhausting, but I stayed firm. I knew the truth, and I was determined to expose her lies. One of the most shocking moments came when Emily's lawyer presented forged documents claiming I had signed away my rights to the house under duress. I had never signed anything like that. I had to produce my own signed affidavits, bank records, and video evidence showing she had been manipulating me for months. The court saw through her lies, but Emily's desperation grew. She started playing the victim, crying on the stand, insisting she only wanted to protect her family, and that I was trying to ruin her life. I felt sick watching her manipulate the system so effortlessly. Meanwhile, I was secretly gathering even more evidence. I found out she had been trying to get a court order to appoint her as the sole guardian of my assets, claiming I was mentally unstable. I knew I had to stop that. I hired a psychologist to evaluate me, and the results were clear. I was perfectly sane. I also had my lawyer subpoena her communication with the lawyer she hired in secret. When those documents came in, it was like finding the smoking gun. She'd been planning her move for months, forging signatures, falsifying documents, and even hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on me. I couldn't believe how far she was willing to go. It made me realize she was not just cheating and stealing, but she was also trying to completely destroy me. I started feeling like I was fighting not just for my house or my inheritance, but for my entire life. I had to protect everything I'd built. I also learned that she had been trying to sell off parts of my property, my land, my stocks, without my knowledge. Every day I felt more like a hostage in my own life. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I oscillated between anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. I kept asking myself how I could have been so blind. How did I miss all the signs? Why did I trust her for so long? Those questions haunted me, but I knew dwelling on them wouldn't change anything. I had to stay focused, stay strong, and keep fighting. I realized that I couldn't undo the past, but I could control the outcome of this nightmare. One night, after a long day in court, I sat alone in my apartment, feeling drained. I looked around and saw the photos of us, the life I thought we had. It hit me hard, how much I had lost and how much she had betrayed me. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I had survived this far, and I wasn't going to let her destroy me completely. I started making plans to rebuild, to reclaim what was mine, and to move on with my life. That's when I realized that, no matter how much she tried to manipulate the system, the truth was on my side. And eventually, the truth would come out. The final hearings were approaching, and I knew the outcome would define everything. I had to stay vigilant, continue gathering evidence, and prepare for whatever came next. I'd learned a lot through this process, about trust, deception, and resilience. I'd also learned that sometimes the only way to fight back is to be relentless, to expose every lie, and to refuse to be broken. I was tired, yes, but I was also stronger than I'd ever been. I knew she wouldn't give up easily, but I was ready for that fight, because I knew deep down that justice was on my side. Would you like me to continue with the final part? The day of the final court hearing felt like the culmination of everything I'd been fighting for. I sat in that courtroom, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and determination. Emily's team tried every trick in the book, more false accusations, emotional appeals, even some last-minute filings to try to sway the judge. But I had the evidence, and I knew I had the truth on my side. My lawyer presented everything: the forged documents, the financial trail of stolen inheritance, the fake signatures, the secret meetings with lawyers, and the manipulative lies she'd spun to try to frame me as unstable. Every piece of evidence was a nail in her coffin. Emily's face was a mask of desperation. She tried to cry, tried to look innocent, but the court saw through her. The judge, after hours of deliberation, finally made the ruling. She declared that Emily had committed multiple acts of fraud, that her claims to the house and inheritance were illegitimate, and that she was to return all stolen funds and cease any legal actions against me. She also ordered Emily to pay damages for the emotional distress and legal fees I'd incurred. The court dismissed all her claims and reaffirmed my ownership of the house. It was a hard-won victory, but it felt like I'd finally taken back control of my life. As I left the courthouse, I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. I'd lost so much: my trust, my peace, and the years I thought I had with Emily. I realized that sometimes love isn't enough to protect you from betrayal. That betrayal had almost broken me, but I refused to let it define me. I looked back at her one last time, her face contorted with anger and shame, and I knew I had done everything I could to stand up for myself. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I started the process of reclaiming my life, selling off her remaining assets, cleaning up the mess she left behind, and finally moving forward. I cut all contact with Emily and Jake. I knew I couldn't trust either of them anymore, and I didn't want their poison in my life. I also took steps to protect myself legally from any future manipulations, changing my will, tightening access to my assets, and making sure I was prepared for anything. Looking back, I realize this whole ordeal has changed me forever. I've learned that trust is fragile and that people can surprise you in the worst ways. But I've also learned that resilience is stronger than betrayal. No matter how dark things get, you find a way to fight back. I've become more cautious, more guarded, but also more determined to protect what's mine and to never let someone manipulate me again. Most importantly, I've learned to value myself more. I used to think love was enough, but now I know that respect, honesty, and integrity matter even more. I've come out of this battered but not broken. I'll rebuild my life on my own terms, and I'll never let anyone take advantage of me again. This experience has taught me that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply to walk away and start over, stronger and wiser than before. And that's exactly what I plan to do. That's the end of my story. It's been a wild ride, full of betrayal, heartbreak, and finally, justice. If anyone out there is going through something similar, just remember, don't lose yourself in the chaos. Stay vigilant, gather your proof, and fight for what's right. Because in the end, the truth always comes out.